Wrestling changed my life. It's the name of a podcast. And the guy that did it sent me a picture and asked me to post it on social media. So that's how I heard about it. I get an email from this guy. So I post it on Instagram. Then I go check his podcast out. Well, so again, wrestling changed my life. You type that in, Apple iTunes, pops right up. And when I got there, I thought he had won. I thought he had just dropped a piece and he was excited and asked me to help get the word out. I thought that's where this came from. Well, no, he's got a whole series out. I mean, he had about 10 or 11 podcasts that were up. So he does a 6-part series on the Smith family. John Smith, Pat Smith, Leroy Smith. Their dad was involved. I'm sure at some point they mentioned Mark Smith, but it was very interesting. It reminded me of a lot of things that I knew in an era that I lived through. But they also put some stuff in there I did not know. Here, let me give you a few that I didn't know. John Smith, they interview Pat, they interview Leroy, and they interview John. So they're inserting Pat and Leroy, who are both talking about the Smith single. Now, the Smith single is, of course, what we all know as a low single. But because John had developed this, only the Smith family knew this for a period of time, so they like to call it a Smith single. And they talked about it took John all the way to the World Championship. And a big belief on that wasn't only the compliment to John that he was an innovator of the sport. And John wasn't only an innovator for the low single specifically, but John also did a 2-knee high crotch. The 2-knee high crotch was simply not done. So John had a couple of things that were his own, but when they threw to John said, man, I don't know why people keep saying that. I won an NCAA championship and I won a world championship before I had ever fired that shot. And that was it. He moved on with something else. But I listened and I go, well, wait a second. Now, he's arguing with his own 2 brothers, one of which is his coach. And he's also arguing with how people view history. I'm just wondering why. Did John Smith not like the message that the reason he won world championships is because he had a move that nobody else had ever seen? The relevance being, if he has a move that nobody's ever seen, that means nobody knows how to defend the move, which is true and would be a compliment to John, but John pushed back, which made me does he not see it as a compliment? Does he think somebody's taking away from his wrestling abilities by trying to say he had a trick move? That is not an interpretation that I've ever heard anybody come to ever, but I think it might have been his because he argued with his own 2 brothers, one of which is a 4-time champion and one of which was his coach. Said, I won a world championship and NCAA title. I never did that move. John Smith lost a match. He lost to Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan. And John weighed in on that match, and he said, no, you can wrestle guys and then retell the story later. Oh, if we wrestled 10 times, I'd beat him 4, or I'd beat him 6, or I'd beat him 8. He said, if I wrestled Jordan 10 times, he would have beat me all 10. At that time. At that time, I wasn't mature enough. I wasn't good enough. He would have beat me every time the right guy won the national championship. That might be the only concession I've ever heard John Smith make, which is why it stood out for me. But I thought that it was interesting. And then John Smith was asked, if you guys will remember, when Leroy, John's older brother, world silver medalist, when Leroy Smith got into his arbitration with Randy Lewis, and Leroy was removed from an Olympic team, Randy was put on the team and came home with the gold medal. When that happened, a large part of the success of Randy Lewis was the arbitration process when they had a key witness named Dan Gable. And they asked John Smith about his brother Leroy's dealings with Randy Lewis and how this worked. And John said, I will not discuss Dan Gable. And so the interviewer tried to ask him one more time. And Smith said, I will not discuss Dan Gable's involvement in that arbitration. And they didn't go back to it. They let it go. But that was also the first sign that there was ever trouble in paradise amongst wrestling's top 2 names, coaches, personalities, wrestlers. And where are you going to put Smith Gable, right? Top 2 and then fill in the blank. What, as coaches, as athletes, as personalities, as all 3? Yeah. Never knew there was trouble in paradise there. And John did not elaborate, but he did say that. And he said a lot. He said a lot by refusing to say anything. And the Pat Smith was real interesting too. Pat Smith used to train every day with Kenny Monday. Was his coach, his workout partner, his friend, but then they went on to wrestle the final wrestle off for the 96 Olympic team. And they were not competitive matches. And Pat was believed to be the guy that was going to beat him. Pat was the new fresh face. Kenny was like 36, came out of retirement. People thought Kenny was going to run into Dave Schultz. Just to remind you that time frame, Dave Schultz ends up getting shot by DuPont. Pat, first four-timer ever, emerges. He's going to take over. Kenny went through. It was just very interesting. And Pat talked about, when did the freestyle, when the World Olympics, this is what my family did, this is what we did, but I was a collegiate wrestler. It was great. And Pat was also talking about Mark Smith. Mark is the little brother. Mark Branch is the name that I meant to say. There is not a college coach in the country that runs a Division I program who will not sit his team down before the NCAA tournament every single year and tell the story of Mark Branch. Mark Branch was a freshman who barely made it to the national tournament, who had a 7-8 record going in, who won the national title. And Pat Smith, who was getting ready to get his 4th championship, was working out in the room with Branch, a freshman who's batting .500. And Pat Smith couldn't get him down. They had a dead even go. Went about 10 minutes, had a dead even go. And Pat gets up and turns to John and said, that kid's going to win a national title. And John looks over and says, you think so? Pat said, I think so. I know so. I'm getting ready to win my 4th. I know he's going to win a national title. John said, huh? Pat looked back at John and said, what's his name? It was his teammate. They traveled the road together. Pat didn't know his name. Branch went on and won the national title. I mean, there was just these kinds of things that I found fascinating. And I always have wondered myself, and I've never asked Leroy. I've been this close to asking Leroy Smith this 3 different times, and I never did. And I don't know that I would have the courage if I had a 4th opportunity, but I have almost asked him what it was like with that arbitration when he was taken off that team, how he returned to USA Wrestling, how he returned. Now he runs the National Hall of Fame, but he was the head coach, the Sun Devils, for many years in there. He worked with in the environment. I so many times wanted to ask him what that was like. And Pat weighed in on it. Pat said, Leroy is my hero because of how he dealt with that. They took him off an Olympic team where he would have been champion. The guy they replaced him with did win the championship. But if you guys remember that year in 1984, home soil, Los Angeles, and Randy Lewis didn't have a close match. Randy Lewis kicked the crap out of everybody. And that was the spot that Leroy was going to have until 2 weeks before. So it's very interesting. That was all Pat said. So it leads me to believe that Leroy handled it very well, never felt sorry for himself, moved forward, and that was that. But I have wanted to ask him, and I did ask John one time, because John, to make the 88 team, had to go through Randy Lewis. Randy Lewis, who was the defending champion, who had beaten John's brother, who, by the way, is now John's coach and going to be in his corner. John's 22 years old. He's a boy taking on, not a man, the man. Guy that ruined holidays at the Smith house. Guy that ruined a lot of things. And now John's got to take him on. And I did ask John that one time, what was that like? You were a boy taking on a man. What was that like? And John said, and I remembered exactly. He said, well, Chael, thought my name was Chael. Well, Chael, you got to understand. In 1988, and he was just taken out of Copenhagen. He goes, 1988, puts it in his mouth, and he looks at me, and he's doing this with his fingers, and he goes, I decided I was going to be Olympic champion. That's it. That's the answer. Your family's mortal enemy, the defending champion who came out of retirement to take everything away from you, the same as he already did once successfully to your brother who is sitting in your corner. The way you dealt with that was that in 1988, you had decided you were going to be the Olympic champion. You were these geniuses, fine line in genius and insanity. That was it. He didn't know anything about it. No part of what I had told him, no part of this story had even factored into him. It was 1988. He was going to win the Olympics. That was it. The fact that this guy had one, what's that got to do with anything? The fact the guy beat my brother, the fact they went to court, the fact they went to arbitration, what's that got to do with anything? It was a great story. Wrestling changed my life. I have not ruined it for you. This is a tease. I'm teasing. I'm dipping my toe in my little pinky toe into a couple of things. Go listen to it.